This is the New York State Bleeding Disorders Coalition's town hall meeting. And my name is Lindsay Cox. I'm the advocacy manager as well as the coalition manager for the coalition. We've also got Bob Graham on here, who is the policy director for the coalition. And then I would like to just very much thank our special guests for today. We've got Miss Randy Kleitz, who's representing Ohio's 75th House District. We are so grateful you are here today. She began her advocacy work when her son was diagnosed with a rare bleeding disorder, and then went on to serve as the associate director of the Northern Ohio Hemophilia Foundation, and then the advocacy coordinator for the Ohio Bleeding Disorders Council. So thank you so much for being on, Randy.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We've also got Mr. Vaughn Ripley, who has hemophilia and has been serving on the Brunswick City Council in Maryland. Vaughn previously served as advocacy chair on the Hemophilia Foundation of Maryland's board of directors. Thank you so much for being on, Vaughn.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
And then we have Mr. Jeremy Griffin, who's the current executive director of the New York City Hemophilia chapter and has been a tireless advocate for the bleeding disorder community. Jeremy also serves on the Oradell School Board in New Jersey. Thanks, Jeremy, for being on. Some subliminal messaging going on there this morning.
Well played.
Many New Jerseyite
here. I gotta be ready. You know,
your message has been clear. I'm going to turn it over to Bob Graham, who's going to start by asking some questions of our fabulous guest.
Okay, Jeremy, by the way, if you get a chance, there's a book called Never Say Never by former New York State Senator John DeFrancisco. Your name tag thing there made me think of a point he makes in the book, because he talks a lot about running for office. He's like, never miss an opportunity to get your name out there. So well played, sir. Well played. So anyways, like Lindsay said, I'm Bob Graham, Policy Director for the New York State Bleeding Disorder Coalition. We wanted to have this event today, because normally we would have had Albany Days in March, and we work with the community members on advocating to state legislators. And as part of that, we'll have training on the legislative meetings in advocating to elected officials. A big part of that is just sitting down and thinking through what you're going to say when you get into those meetings, because the meetings are often really short, so you have to be focused, you have to be intentional. So what we've done today is we've asked our special guests here, because they all have unique experiences in that they are members of the bleeding disorder community and have advocated for the bleeding disorder community. They're also elected officials. So now they've been on both sides of that meeting, as it were. They've been the people asking for something, and they've been the people that are being asked for something. And we thought they could share with us the insights they have from having been on both sides of the table. Now we're recording this so that it will be used at future training events such as Albany Days 2021 or other local events. So please be mindful of that. We have a few questions we're going to start with that were submitted by people, and then we're going to ask if there are members of the audience who want to ask questions. If you do have a question, though, we ask that you send it in through the text box, just so that we can make sure to get all of the questions looked at in a nice order. Because again, we are recording this. We want to make sure if you've got a really unique or relevant question for Albany Days, we want to make sure that that gets included in this. So, because I'm a guy that likes paper, or I've been told I like paper, I'm going to start out with the question, and this is for everyone, and we'll start with Randy, though. We'll put it out to Randy because I believe in the hierarchy of legislators, you're the top tier among us today. So running for office is hard work, especially these days. What made you want to go through that work to run for office?
So thank you, Bob, and thank you everyone for joining. I think for me, it was really super personal. Just anybody who is advocating within the hemophilia community understands the need for those of us who are impacted directly by especially healthcare changes. Know that if we don't step up and voice our concerns and know how to advocate for ourselves and community members, then things just don't get done. And so I was actually asked to run for office. It wasn't something that had been on my radar at all to do. I really liked my work that I was doing with the coalition and within the community. And, but when I was asked, I started thinking about like what that would really mean for the hemophilia community, especially for our family and for our local community. As a state representative, I represent about 110,000 people in my county. And so learning more about how, as a advocate for rare diseases, that also translates into larger things. So that was really what kind of drew me to the decision that I made. And you know, us in the hemophilia community also and the bleeding disorders community also know like challenges are nothing. Like that's just what gets us going, right? Like as soon as you're told you probably aren't going to win or you probably can't do this, then that just puts a fire under us even more. So that's definitely what made me decide to run. And honestly, I did sell it to my husband as I don't think I can win. I'm not very politically connected. And so the person that was supposed to be running against me was super connected politically, but I just wanted to get a platform for us and healthcare. And so I thought I could at least do that as my part. And then I won a 3-way primary race, and then I won a 3-way general election, and then I didn't have a primary opponent this election cycle, so I'll be going into my general this time. So.
Wow. Okay, Vaughn.
So I guess I didn't think of it as tough as maybe others. I agree with a lot of the stuff that Randy said. I felt like I had already, because of hemophilia and HIV and other things that I'm an advocate for, I had already built a platform. So I had a pretty big kind of following, even local following, and that made it maybe a little bit easier for me. The first time that I ran, I didn't put yard signs out. I was the only person who was running that didn't do yard signs. And everybody basically knocked me for that. You know, they're like, are you crazy? You can't possibly win without yard signs. And I didn't want to believe that. I didn't want to believe that Americans vote because of a yard sign that they see. You know what I mean? I wanted to believe that they were going to look into each of us and they were going to try and figure out, like, is this person, do they really have the city's best interest at heart and stuff? So I sort of went the opposite direction of it being hard work and everything, and went, let my actions speak for themselves and let the people decide. And I believe that that's why I won in the position. It wasn't hard work for me. The hard work was the years before that, leading up to, you know, becoming the man that I am. That's where the hard work was 25 years ago. And over those 25 years, I continued doing hard work, which made the election process and running for office easy.
Okay. Jeremy, same question to you, sir.
So for me, there were probably two things that pushed me to run. The first was I ran in 2017. So we had just gone through the presidential election of 2016. And I think for me, it was really personal in the sense that when I looked at all the candidates, regardless of politics, I didn't feel like the candidates represented the real people. And it was a moment in my life that I was like, why do we have this crappy choice? You know, like why are like it's the same style of candidates, and what's going on? Why don't real people run? And I was like, well, I'll run. The other thing for me is I just moved to my little town. I lived here less than 2 years. And as a person, I just kind of feel like you need to get involved with local, you know, not necessarily politics, but you need to get involved locally where you are. And because I moved to town, I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to run for school board. My kids are young. They weren't even in school, right? And I was like, I'm here because of this great school, and I'm going to be a part of making it even better. I think those two things for me were what inspired me, like that sense of a responsibility to give back and make a difference. And then that also like disappointment in the political machines that exist that go, hey, why are we getting the same style of candidates over and over? Let's get real people.
Okay. All right. So for the next question, we're going to turn it around a little. Now that you've taken on this responsibility of running for office, you're in a position that I don't think the average voter always appreciates, which is that now you are responsible for making decisions that are going to affect the lives of your friends, your family, your neighbors, people. You know, Randy has, what is 110,000 people that she's representing. So now in your role as an elected official, you're making decisions that can have a significant impact on the lives of all those people. It's a pretty awesome responsibility. How does that shape the way you approach the job? Randy?
So thank you for that question too. I think, you know, as a state representative in Ohio, we have 88 counties, but 99 state representatives. And then as state representatives, you're assigned to different committees. So I was grateful that I was assigned to the health committee. So I am not only representing the 110,000 people that's in my district, but I'm also representing the voice of patients on health committee. And we have a really dynamic group of state representatives that are serving on health committee. And on the, I'm a Democrat, so on the Democratic side, we have a really solid group of Democrats that are working together. And so that makes it really awesome. We have a doctor that does general medicine in hospitals. We have an epidemiologist, which is awesome for right now. We have a social worker. We just have these individuals who are totally invested in healthcare and making healthcare better. And so, although it is an awesome burden, I guess, it's also an awesome pleasure to be able to be that voice for patients and to make sure that every bill that we vet through our committee, the patient's voice and the patient side of what that bill will do is being thought about. And I think that that's what I've taken to the table in health committee, and I think I've built a pretty good rapport with all the colleagues on the committee to make sure that they know if I'm asking a question, there's no doubt where my agenda is. My agenda is always to make sure that patients are taken care of.
Okay. Vaughn.
So I guess it definitely impacts me thinking about the fact that some of the things that I'm working on are going to have an effect on family and friends and neighbors. But that is why I did this. You know, I mean, it's even, maybe this question is perfect for a local political person, you know, public servant, because that's what you're talking about. Friends, family, and neighbors are everybody who immediately surrounds you. And so that's the reason for running for city politics, you know, is to make sure that the community that we have is something that works for everybody. So even though I feel that burden, that heavy responsibility of having to be there for friends, family, and neighbors, I also know my role is not to let my decisions be impacted as much by that. And sometimes I might rub people the wrong way, especially like friends. And, you know, we talk about it. We sit down over a coffee or a beer and we talk about why I made the decision in the direction that I made or something. And it's actually comforting knowing that your friendships and your family connections and your community connections are strong enough that even if you don't agree on certain subjects, people can still get along and understand, you know, debate in a friendly fashion, if you will, as opposed to what we seem to be seeing these days, which is these crazy debates from all different directions. I live for it. I love being there for my community. And sometimes I'm going to let some percentage of that community down, and sometimes I'm going to lift a huge percentage of that community up. And so I look to the upside, and I work with the folks who I've let down and try and figure out ways that we can make it all work together. But this is my reason for being in local politics.
Okay, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think for me, when I think about the gravity of the role and the responsibility to families and things like that, I'm in my third year on the school board. And like I said, when I first did it, I was like, this feels like the right thing to do. I just want to get involved. I want to make a difference. Being in now, it's like, wow, this is a huge responsibility. It's the largest percentage of taxpayers' dollars that are done locally that are affecting our community. It's where property taxes are going, and we need to be good stewards of that. The other thing for me, like when I think about the various levels of government, at first I was like, well, school board, it's like an entry place or whatever. I've come to view it completely different. I think about all social change that happens, all the things that we want, the big changes we want as a community. It starts in education. And so the gravity and responsibility I feel as a school board member, setting policy, helping direct curriculum and things like that, I know that the things that we decide now will have lasting impact, not for like 5 to 10 years, but for decades in the future. So I take it very seriously.
Okay. I'm actually going to ask a follow-up question at this point that's a little off script, but was sparked by things that you've said. So as an elected official, you have to work with other elected officials that are also representing other people that have diverse needs and interests. So at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to do everything you want to. Compromise is part of the business. And I think that we as voters don't often recognize that. How does that work for you, knowing that you can't necessarily deliver everything you want to, that you're going to have to work with other people and give to get? How does that affect the way you approach this? And what's something that you would want ordinary people to know about that process? When they don't get the thing they wanted, what's good for them to remember? Randy?
Sure. So another really great question, Bob. So in Ohio, just to give you a broad picture of what's happening here in our state, there are 61 Republicans and 38 Democrats in the state house. And so for me, I live in a district that is a third Republican, a third Democrat, and a third independent. So to Vaughn's point that he made earlier, I'm going to make people mad because I'm not politically going to agree with everything that everybody does. But I think as a good elected official, what you need to do is listen to what you're being asked to do, figure out a way that you can come to a compromise that works for the majority of people or in the best interest of the people who you're trying to work with. And so for me, I have introduced 8 bills at the State House, and of the 8 bills, 3 of them have actually passed the House and are waiting in the Senate, and that's pretty it's a difficult task. But as we all know in the hemophilia community, one of the things that we have done in every bleeding disorder priority that we've done is we figure out a way to make sure that what we're going to ask for can be done, or we won't ask for it. So we put in the work before we go for the ask, and we make sure that we vet everything and look at all sides of things before we go in. And that's how I've legislated, and that's how I feel like I've been able to be successful, is that when you're in the super minority and you're in a district that is pretty standard for a very purple area, you have to make sure that what you're looking to do, you can find a way to figure that path out to get to something being done. So and then I think the other thing is politics has become so divisive, right? Like everybody wants to talk about the things that are far out, either the far left or the far right. And that's just not anybody who's known me for the 18 years I've been in this community. That's not me. I'm always like, let's get the stuff done. Let's work on the stuff that we can agree on. And that's who I am. It's who I am to the core. So that's how I've been able to do things. And I think that's the most important thing to your question, Bob, is like, figure out those things that you can agree with the majority of the people that you have to serve with. If it's on the school board, if it's on city council, if it's a township trustee, if it's county-wide, find the things that you know you can do, find the right people to do them with, and then move forward. And that's how, you know, I've been able to get some things done. I have 3 bipartisan bills. I have 2 bills that I knew I probably couldn't get a Republican to join me on. I tried really hard, but we just didn't get there. Equal pay being one of them. That's just a very partisan issue, and protecting the Affordable Care Act with provisions under the ACA, that when I tried really hard to get Republicans to support that in Ohio, and we just couldn't get there. So we just introduced it. 2 Democrats. We did get 1 Republican to sign on as a co-sponsor, but we're just moving forward. But we're getting hearings because we're pushing. So I think that that's the thing, is figure out the things that you can get done, do those, and just try and do what you can do. I would love to get everything that I feel strongly personally about, but that's not what I'm elected to do. I'm elected to do the work of the people that I represent.
Okay. Fawn, now to you, and that's recognizing that at the city council, these are people that are living right around you. So you're face to face every day with people that you may have to disappoint.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with what Randy was saying. I guess the big thing for me is I have the luxury of being a centrist. I decided a long time ago not to pick a side because I like things about both sides. And that makes it a little bit easier for me when I'm dealing with this stuff. I'm a firm believer in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. And one of the big takes that I get out of that book is a win-win. And I basically try to go through life with that mentality. So when I walk into a room, I don't see red and blue. I see opportunity on all sides, because I know that everybody, I mean, we're all humans, and we all can be communicated with. And if you come to the room with an open mind, I know that we can sit down and discuss things and get to a point where we're going to come to an agreement that'll help everybody. Now, that said, I believe you need to have boundaries. I believe that you need to have hard lines in your life. You know, there's certain things. My children cannot run into traffic, period, flat, final. I don't care how you want to discuss it. They will never cross that line when I'm there. And so I have those hard lines in my life, but I know where those hard lines are. And that's where the whole key comes in, right? Knowing where those hard lines are. If we start approaching those hard lines, I can kind of catch that proactively and work with it before it actually gets to the hard line. Because I'm afraid, Randy was talking about the split in this nation. I believe that's because a lot of times we're letting people go all the way to our hard lines and then we explode because we didn't take the time and effort to work on it when it was in this area. And I feel like that's where we need to proactively be kind of working on this stuff. And I think we can do the same thing at the city level, the county level, the state level, and at the nation level, heck, the world level. We should all be thinking along those lines as opposed to, this is my stance and this is where I'm, you know, and as soon as you get near that, I'm going to attack you. I don't believe in that. I think that we should be talking way before that, which means we'll never get to that attack point, because we'll be able to talk that out over here in the cushion area before we get to my hard line. And I feel the same way for you. If I see you've got a hard line, I know that. I'm not going to sit there and push your buttons and say, okay, let's see if we can't get you to that hard line. Instead, I'm going to say, hey, how can we pull back a little bit from that so that we can make this a win-win situation? Look, we've got problems like infrastructure, right? We've got water problems in my city, and our infrastructure is old. That's a no-brainer. This is not a red and blue subject. This is not something that we need to fight about because, you know, I believe this way and I believe, no, we all need water and we need it at an affordable price. So let's make that work. And so I feel like if you go into the room with that mindset, as opposed to, well, I don't want to agree with him because he's a Republican, or I don't want to agree with him because he's a Democrat. I don't think that's the way that we should go into the room. I think we should go into the room and say, hey, we've got this problem that we have to solve, and we have to come together and figure that out so that it's a win-win for everybody in this room. And I mean everybody in the room. One person can't walk out of there not feeling like they got to win. That's not a win-win. If you get 6 happy people and 1 unhappy person in a council, that's not a win-win. We should be able to work together, whereas a strong enough group and a smart enough group, we should be able to work together and solve this stuff.
Okay. Jeremy, how does that work for you, especially at the school board level, which is it's people talking about their children, which is a deeply personal subject, obviously. How do you try to find the win-win when people are looking at the things that are going to determine their children's future?
What I would just say, maybe just pause the tape right now and replay what Vaughn said. If you can just add that in there, that's fine. It works for me. I do think, you know, on the school board level, emotions get high. I think with anybody it does. There's confrontation. You know, like this year, moving to virtual learning, everyone has an opinion about virtual learning. Everyone has an opinion about what the school should be doing. So there's a lot of people reaching out and feel very strongly about stuff. I'll speak specifically from my interaction on moving to the board, because I think maybe it brings a different kind of thing that we haven't talked about yet. I moved into a board that all like were kind of cohesive in one way. And I was the first outside member to that board. And change or progress, as I would define it, would be difficult. One voice doesn't change anything. And, you know, I would say, you know, for the public, whenever they are upset about something or whatever, the one thing I would remind them is like, it takes a little time. For me, one of the things I did was immediately after that first year, I started recruiting other candidates to run to the board. And every year I've had a slate of candidates that I've helped or, you know, like helped recruit to run for the school board. Historically, school board elections across New Jersey, but also here, were just uncontested. And my election was one of the first ones in a long time that was contested. So, you know, my advice whenever you look at like change or all that is definitely along the lines of it takes time. But I want to also echo what people were saying. Like, I came into it thinking like, these people are not doing a good thing. These people are not doing a good job. Once you're in there, there is a reality that like these are real human beings with real values. And if you're going to have any progress, you have to see where those values overlap. And if you focus on that as opposed to the issue and you go, hey, we all value learning or whatever it is, you're going to have more progress. I had written down here, you know, no matter what, as an elected official, stay strong on your values, but be willing to consider alternate ideas and details. The devil's sometimes in the details, but if you're unwilling to discuss those details, you're not going to get anywhere.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Those are all very good points. Now what we're going to do is we're going to want to bring this down and focus it in on advocacy, because this is, we said, will be used for training community members to advocate to state, local, and federal elected officials. And that can be an intimidating process sometimes for an ordinary community member who's not used to working the halls of government. So what we'd like you to do is to let ordinary folks know, does it make a difference to you as an elected official to hear from ordinary people? Randy, how important is it to you to hear from, you know, everyday members of the community you represent?
So this is something that I've learned a different perspective on as an elected official now. So it is very important to hear directly from constituents. They are definitely the ones that will motivate you to engage and do things differently. However, there is also a point where you need to hear from associations and the people who know the you know, in my example, it's legislation. So if there's going to be a legislative issue, it's also really important for there to be a voice to the legislation. And I think that that's something that we do pretty well in the bleeding disorders community, but not a lot of organizations do, where you have a constituent or a person who is invested in the issue. So if it's something that's going to hit the county commissioners differently than it would like the township trustees or the city councilmen, when they come to me with an issue, I know where they're coming from. I know exactly, how they're perceiving that legislation. When a constituent who has an issue comes to me about that issue, having, and again, I know we're pretty well organized in the hemophilia community and bleeding disorders community of doing this, but making sure that we're very concise to what we're trying to accomplish. I was super surprised at how, before COVID, my schedule in the State House while I'm there working for 3 days a week is literally set by 15-minute increments. And you have only so much time to process what you're being told and how you can remember that and retain that for when you go into committee to talk about those issues. So, I think there's the relationship building that needs to happen so you can become a trusted resource to elected officials is one thing, but whenever then that's fine. Like that's a goal that should be done within our community, in the bleeding disorders community. That is something that should be a priority. However, when you need something done and you are going to an elected official to get those things done, be very clear and concise. You want to make sure that when you're addressing an issue, you're pointing out the exact issue that you have, that you are able to articulate why it's an issue that impacts you directly and how it can be fixed. So just as simple as those three things. And if that is something that you're uncomfortable with as a patient advocate, make sure that you take in your chapter leaders, make sure you take in your coalition leaders. Don't feel like you have to do this alone. As a bleeding disorder advocate, use the resources in our community to make sure that you are able to articulate efficiently your needs. So I think that that's kind of the thing that I knew before that it was really important, but I cannot overstate the need to be clear and concise and quickly get your point across and make sure that it is just super simple and easy to remember. And back to the point of earlier, we can't fix everything. A lot of times a big win is a small fix. So just remember that if you go to one person and you just make that your goal to try and get that one thing fixed through that one elected official, that's a win. And you don't have to do a lot of fixes. And I think that I know that's from the state perspective. I don't know if my other friends here have a thought on how to fix things at the school board level and city council level. But
all right, well, Vaughn, how important is it to you to hear from ordinary community members, not the lobbyists, but the people down the street or from around the corner that are not professional political operatives, but just people who have needs, who have concerns? How important is it for you to hear from them directly?
I think that it's everything. I mean, the stuff that I'm working on is for, the constituents, for the citizens, for the folks who live in our town. So I think it's imperative for them. I've never been a fan of the cliche. A lot of times you see on social media when somebody complains on one of the pages, then 3 people chime in and say, why don't you run for council if you've got this, you know what I mean? And it's like such a cliche. And the funny thing is, that's kind of why I did run for council. But because it was like I called myself out, after being an armchair, kind of like always yelling about this, that, and the other. But the truth of the matter is, you don't have to run for council. You just have to be a part of your town. That doesn't, just because maybe you don't want to run for council, you don't have time, or you don't, your family doesn't agree with it, or it just doesn't work for you, or you're not the type of person to sit behind that desk. But that doesn't preclude you from being a part of what's going on with your city government. So my first recommendation would be get out there, go to your local meetings and sit at them. You don't even have to say anything. So many people get sweaty palms and worried about, am I going to be up at the podium? You can go and sit in the crowd at a council meeting and say nothing all night, but you learn from what's going on there. And if you do that a couple times, you'll start to understand, oh, okay, this is the process. So I'm glad I went a couple times, because I would have just raised my hand in the council meeting and tried to say something, and I would have been shut down and embarrassed in front of my peers. But now I understand all I have to do is wait until they say it's time for somebody to go up and speak, and I can speak then. Another thing that it affords you is an opportunity to meet with your town legislators, because as soon as the council meeting ends, we don't split out the back door and jump in our cars out of the, you know what I mean? We're hanging out in City Hall. We hang out, and that's where we do some networking and we talk and stuff. And this is after the council meeting, and this is a completely open environment for people to have discussions with us. I'm sure that's totally different than what Randy runs into, because she's kind of more locked into the things or whatever. But in my council meetings, when it ends, we just become citizens again, and everybody hangs out and we're all talking to each other. And I think that's a good opportunity to meet your council members, your mayor, or whoever runs the city, if it's a city administrator or something like that. They get to know you, you get to know them, and you can do that on a regular basis. That's one way to really get in there. I agree completely with what Randy said. If you're planning on talking to anybody, whether it's at the local level, the county or state or nation, you need to have your ducks in a row. I can't tell you how many people have gone up to the podium and kind of, tried to explain what they were saying, but it's clear they didn't have any real kind of path or direction in what they were saying, and maybe didn't even research what they were trying to say. And unfortunately, it's very hard for us to try and figure out what point they're trying to convey in the short amount of time that they have. So I would say Randy nailed it. Be clear and concise. Know exactly what you're trying to say when you want to talk to somebody. And that even includes after the meeting. Obviously, there's more leeway and stuff like that, but know what you're trying to say so that you actually have a point when you're talking to somebody at these meetings. I feel like if you do your research, that's going to be really helpful too, because I was guilty of this. A lot of people think council members, Board of Education members, state senators, stuff like that, they don't think they know what they're talking about, and they don't think that they pay any attention to the issues. And you might be pretty surprised when you start into a conversation and you get completely blindsided by the fact that they know way more about the subject that you're talking about than you do. And so that's why I would say research. Look into the thing that you're trying to do beforehand so that you can actually have an intelligent communication with the person that you're discussing things with. It's no different than anything else we would do. If I know my buddy is a huge football fan and he knows every quarterback at every college, I'm not going to start off a conversation about how I know more about football than him. You know what I mean? If I want to have a conversation about that stuff, then I'm going to do some of my research and I'll be able to hold a conversation. And it's the same thing in politics. There's no difference there. You want to definitely know what you're talking about before you get in those discussions. The one thing that I would say that's not local politic based, but since we're talking about advocacy and stuff, I was pleasantly surprised, first off, that even at a city level, I'm still able to raise awareness. I'm still able to be an advocate. That's something that surprised me once I got in the council seat. And that's exciting for me. But if you're in the bleeding disorder community and you're looking to be an advocate, or you want to raise awareness and you're going to things like, say, for instance, Washington Days, not only do you need to be clear and concise, but you need to go in there dressed for the role of doing it. And if you got children, bring them, because there's nothing that a senator or a congressman loves more than taking pictures with children. And I know that sounds funny, but it's the honest truth, especially if they have a bleeding disorder, because that's going to get their ear and everything. Remember, you have that small amount of time. Like Randy said, she's going on 15-minute sections, right? They're going to ship you in. You're going to have a couple minutes to say what you've got. You better be clear and concise, and you better know what you're talking about, and then they're going to ship you out. So make sure that you make your point in a way that it's also memorable. You know what I mean? So that in those 15 minutes, that person says, because after I did Washington Days and then I came back and I was talking with one of the congressmen and he said, I remember you and your children because, you know, of this, you guys talked about this and it was pretty exciting. And so you want to do that. You want to be memorable, and it's hard to be memorable inside of 15 minutes. So start by knowing what you're talking about and being clear and concise.
Excellent. Jeremy, we're actually going to, instead of letting you say that what they said was excellent, which it is, we'll let you go first with a new question this time, because you've been number 3 in line. I feel let's be democratic here and give you a chance.
All these notes I've been taking on what they said and what I was going to say differently. All right.
But this is a really good question. And you went into the job, you ran for office having certain expectations, and then you got into it. What's something that you've seen since you got into the position that has surprised you? What's something that you wished you knew then that you know now?
Boy, I'm glad Jeremy got this one first.
You know, school boards, I think all, you know, elected bodies have a level of bureaucracy tied to them. The rules around school boards are pretty crazy. You know, like whenever I was running, I was really upset about the transparency of the school board, how they weren't really deliberating on issues in public very well, and we were pushing for the meetings to be videotaped. And I was just like, this is totally right. Why aren't they being more transparent? There is some truth to that, right? I also was pushing highly on engagement. Why aren't they engaging the parents better? Why, whenever someone comes up and asks them a question during open public comment, are they not responding to them? Why are they just like letting that happen? They just seem to dismiss. Once you get in there, you realize, hey, there are some reasons for this. There are some reasons why you might not want to record all your meetings, because maybe someone would accidentally say something about a staff member that could get you into trouble. The other thing is weird about a board member. I was like, oh yeah, well, I'm in charge of this board and I can talk to the teachers about this, or I could talk to the principal about this. There's a lot of rules about that, what you can and cannot do, even to the point of like some really, I don't know. I mean, I think the purpose is good, but things like the school board, if there's an issue that comes up and we want to talk about it, there's 9 of us. We cannot email over 4 of us at any given time. So if I want to reply all to an email that I get as a school board member saying, hey, I think this issue's dumb or whatever, I cannot, because of protections of Open Public Meeting Acts and when it can happen. And I think some of those complexities were interesting, and that's a lot of navigating, I think.
Okay. Now, we are coming up on it's 11:15. We did say that we wanted to allow some time for our attendees.
But Bob, I want to interrupt you for 1 second. I just thought of one other thing that I learned once I got in the office. Of all of the elected officials in New Jersey, school board is the only one that's not paid. I wish I would have known that before. I would have run for something else.
Okay. So what I'm going to say now is, Randy or Vaughn, if there's something that sticks out as a story you want to quickly offer for what you know now that you wish you knew then, absolutely. If not, we'll be moving on to the audience questions. So Randy, Vaughn, do either of you have something? Vaughn.
Yeah, I guess and I'm not trying to scare anybody away from it, because I highly encourage everybody to get involved with, you know, your community and being an advocate and raising awareness. But I will tell you one thing that I learned, and it was like a slap in the face, and that is, this is work. I'm ashamed to say that I thought, this is going to be like everything else, and it'll be easy. I'll skate in there, and I got this. I can easily juggle it in, and it was a lot more work than I anticipated. It's not to say that I couldn't do it, but it was more challenging than I ever imagined. So I just want to tell people that, and like I said, not scaring anyone away. Do it, but understand there is a lot of work involved with anything that you do. Anything. Whether you're trying to raise awareness, advocacy, or running for some office, there's a lot of work involved with it. So just be prepared for that, but come ready to fight and do what's right.
Okay. So,
and I would just add, as a policy nerd, I really thought that I could just go in, focus on the policy side of things and get stuff done. And I naively thought that I would not have to deal with very many political decisions. And so at the statewide level, I would say I was super surprised at how everything is so political. And I know Jeremy kind of mentioned it as we were kind of joking as we were preparing for the call, but the first time I had a viral post go and the stuff that was said about me personally, and having my son see that, those were the toughest days of, and my son just started following my political page, Randy for Ohio on Facebook, Randy Lights on Twitter. But thank you, Jeremy. So the first time that happened, where I had that happen, was literally the day Colton started following my political page. And I've been in office for over a year, and he just started following my Facebook page. And so that was really, really tough. It's just to see, just because you're an elected official, just because you're a Democrat, there are certain things that are said and done that are way political, and that's frustrating. So I knew it was going to happen, but to this level, I was super naive.
okay. So now we'll get to the audience comments. And the first one comes from a longtime community member. They say, I always email or tweet my assembly, councilor, borough president, but never get a response. I stop over their office and I feel like I'm just getting brushed off. To me, it feels like advocacy only matters, that it only makes an impact when we're physically at the Capitol, at the offices. Otherwise, they have their own agendas and they aren't always concerned with what people think. So, Randy, we'll make it a two-part question. You must hear from a lot of people. You represent 110,000 people, and actually in your role on the committee, you represent the entire state. So you must hear from literally thousands of people a week. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. Is that, I know you, so you try to respond to everyone, but how practical is it for you to try and really acknowledge people? And would you say to someone, if this was a constituent of yours who said, I've called or I've emailed and I feel like I don't get a meaningful response, what would you like to say to that person?
I very intentionally, so as a state representative, I am in the state capitol, which is 2 hours and 15-minute drive from my district. So not a lot of my constituents can meet with me in Columbus. So I do have to depend on email and on getting phone calls and running social media. I am also, as many of you who have met me know, I'm a bit of an introvert. And so I need to unplug, or I cannot stay I cannot stay productive. And so for me, it's been trying to manage how to respond to constituents, because I absolutely want my constituents to be able to feel like they can call me. I am one of the state representatives that gives out my cell phone on a regular basis. It is on all my literature. So I will get text messages, I will get calls, I get emails, I get private messages, I get Facebook messages, I get tweets, I get phone calls to my office. So it is a lot to manage. So I would say to anybody who is trying to build a relationship with their elected officials, and I forget which one of the gentlemen mentioned it earlier, go to those local meetings. I try to have office hours back home to make it easier for my constituents to meet me and to talk to me. Go to those meetings, meet in person. And remember that I represent over 100,000 people. So having an opinion on every single thing that I do and expecting me to answer you on that issue every single time you come to me is unrealistic. I cannot, and I have them, and I appreciate that they're so engaged, but I also can't spend 10 minutes a week even, and I know that sounds crazy, but I can't spend 10 minutes a week addressing one of my constituents about every issue that I voted on. It would be impossible for me to continue that with all of my constituents. And if I can't provide that level of service and a level of engagement to all of my constituents, then it's unfair for me to do it to a few. So I do have a few people that are constantly coming at me, and I will engage with them regularly, but just not every single time they come at me, because it's just impossible for me to do so. So that's another thing that was really hard for me to understand before I was elected. So.
Okay. Now, so another question, and it actually, I think, segues from that. When you do have the opportunity to meet with an elected official, and we often talk about, use personal stories to convey your message. We had one audience member ask, because the time is so limited, what are things you can do to make your story, make your meeting more memorable? And actually we'll start with Vaughn, because Vaughn, you talked about building the relationship, learning a little about the process to help you focus your ask. So if someone's got a focused ask and they have their facts, what are there things that they can do to really give their personal story an impact that's going to last after they leave?
Well, I think you've already kind of answered it with the question, right? The personal stories are going to be the key to that. And again, I fall back on the concise and to the point. But you definitely want to share personal stories that are impactful. In this community, those stories are everywhere. Each and every one of us have incredible stories that we can tell to, our senators and congressmen. And I think that it's really important to send that message, but at the same time, again, and I just keep falling back to the clear and concise, but if you only have a set amount of time and you're rambling on about your story, I think that it's really hard to convince somebody to pay attention to you. Randy nailed it. I have it much easier. I probably get 6 emails a week from constituents. And so I can take the time, to read through the emails and respond to them and stuff. But as far as I'm concerned, an email, if you're trying to raise awareness or advocacy, an email is not the way to do it. And Twitter is even less so. I would say, and I'm not trying to knock anybody's approach, but what I'm saying is I would say if you're using email, it should be something like, I'd like to sit down with you. And that's it. You know what I mean? So that it's not 7 paragraphs, because if she's getting 1,000 emails a week, she can't read 7 paragraphs. If you get 1,000 of those in a week, I mean, do the math. You can't even read that, let alone respond to it. So, or put the time and effort into it that it takes to respond. So instead, get down there and meet with your senator and congressman. Your local senators are there at your Capitol. They're there and they're available for you. Their door is open. They'll tell you actually when you go in there, yes, this is what it's supposed to be. You're supposed to come and talk to me. And I've run into that numerous times here in Maryland, and it's been really powerful. It's given me a lot of opportunities to meet these folks. Randy reiterated the point about going to the meetings and things like that. If you go to the meetings, it gives you an opportunity. Walking the halls and being at these meetings gives you an opportunity to meet with these folks. And I think that's really important, and it's going to be much more powerful than an email message. As far as what to say in your story, you know, that's an individual thing. You know, my stories, I tend to fall back on because I'm an old hemophiliac, I fall back on the old stuff, right? The 80s. I've got stories of stuff that would make your skin crawl. And so those are stories that I share, you know, and that shock factor gives another moment for them to remember me, but also gives them a moment to realize that I'm a human being telling these stories of the things that I went through. And so that's a powerful thing. And you got to find your own powerful one. I can't possibly say to 10,000 hemophiliacs, here's the story you got to tell, or how to tell it, or anything like that. But what I would say is stick to that idea of knowing the story that you're going to tell, know it well. Right? Just like you're giving an inspirational speech, prepare your story so that when you sit down with that person, boom, it gets delivered, and it gets delivered in a heartfelt way. You know your story, but are you going to hem and haw over it because you're not sure which parts to tell? Or are you going to come really prepared and deliver and nail that story in a short amount of time? So that's the advice that I would give.
And I'll just quickly,
as an older, even older hemophiliac, Vaughn, I would just say that we prefer the term experienced or veteran patient. Thank you. So, Randy.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback. Vaughn said it earlier, but I just want to repeat it, is do your research on who you're speaking to. No, you don't want to spend 3 minutes telling them about bleeding disorders if they say that they have had, you know, somebody coming into their office for the last 6 years to talk to them about bleeding disorders. So know your audience, and know when you go in to prepare to have a different version of your story. If when you ask a question, when you get there, do you know, I mean, we've all been through the training. So, you know, when you go to Washington Days, the first question they say is, do you know if you have, do you know anything about bleeding disorders? If they say yes, pivot, don't repeat what you already learned, and then make sure that you have that go-to story, and then do your research not only on the person that you're speaking to, but the issue that you're talking about. And we all have a lot of stories over the years. I'm still a baby in the community at 18 years, I feel like. And so I think that, you know, our message has to be very specific to the ask that we go into, and, you know, make sure I have it here. I have always carried a book with me to make sure I stay on task, because I know when I get nervous, I speak, you know, a little faster, and I get nervous and I go off the tangent. So like whenever I was there the last time, we were talking about genetics. So I pull the things to make sure that I'm talking about exactly what my focus is, and then making sure that I thank them for their time afterwards to build that relationship. So I think that that's really important for us to continue to do.
Lindsay, make a note of that. We are totally borrowing that idea for Albany. Totally.
Hey,
Definitely.
Bob, I'd like to add on to that too. Randy brought up a great point. When I was doing Washington Days, and they told me I had a couple congressmen and senators to pick from, because I had a whole bunch, and I just Wikipedia'd. And I found one that had a nephew with hemophilia. And it was like so simple. You know, it was a 2-minute search. But like she said, doing research on the person that you're going to, that's a perfect example. I knew right away, that's whose door I want to go through, because I already have that person's attention. You know what I mean? By coming in there with something that is in his immediate family and he lives with and deals with. So yeah, that research is key, and it may only take a couple minutes. It's not that hard to learn about the people that you're talking to.
And instantly you have credibility. When I have somebody that comes into my office, and as soon as they sit down with me, they say, oh, I know you're a patient advocate because you have a son that has a chronic illness. instantly I'm going to listen to them better because I know they did their homework. I know they have prepared for the meeting as much as I have, because usually I know what they're coming in for. I know what bill they want to talk about. So I've spent some time going back over that bill to make sure that if I have any specific questions about the bill, they're the expert on the bill, or they wouldn't be coming to my office. And so I know I'm going to have good questions. So as a lawmaker, as an elected official, we owe it to the constituents coming into our office to also research. So there's nothing better as an elected official to have somebody sit down in front of you who instantly shows you they're prepared as I am for the meeting. And it builds your credibility so much so. So if there's anything that I think that is the takeaway from this, I think that that is the biggest thing that I knew before I was elected, but I know even more so now, because it is very few meetings that when they come in, they know something about me. I had one guy that came into my office who knew my birthday was his exact same birthday. Little creepy, but I at least knew me before he came into my office. So,
you remember that though.
yeah, exactly. And I remember him very well.
Jeremy, anything you want to add?
I was just going to say, in terms of like storytelling, because storytellings are so important. I think of it like three different ways. Connect emotionally so people can relate. So it's similar to what they were just saying, like relate to them, whatever you know, but connect emotionally so that they can relate, tell specifics, and explain why. When I think about a school board, example of that, someone coming to me, and if they said, my 7-year-old cries every night because he feels like he's not good enough. That sense of emotionally connecting, everybody can feel like they weren't good enough. As an elected official, I'm like, oh, that sucks for that little kid. And then the person might go on and say, he's crying because he doesn't feel like he's good enough at handwriting. Every night, the handwriting homework is just overwhelming. He doesn't feel good about it. So now it's just about that specific kid, little Johnny. But somehow that person has to tell me the specifics of what's going on. Then they have to say, I think that, it's gotten so bad that my son has actually said, I hate writing and I hate school. And I'm like, oh my gosh, as an elected official, I don't want this kid to hate school. That's a bad thing. And the person might be able to say, I think that it's time for us to look at a better handwriting curriculum so that we ensure all of our kids love school and are learning. So like in a few little sentences, you can connect emotionally, you can tell specifics, and then you can kind of explain how it can benefit everybody. I know it's not a bleeding disorder example, but I think it kind of gets to the heart of why stories are important and how you can use them quickly.
Oh, that's awesome. Jeremy, were you also little Johnny? Is that a personal example or no?
I think you have seen my handwriting, and I will show everybody now that my handwriting looks like this. So
confirm.
Yes, I was
little Johnny.
And so I completely relate to it, and maybe I've shared too much.
Okay, no, that's good. Thank you. I'm so glad. There is one thing I would love to end on. I know we're going over time, so just is that not letting me? Here we go. Okay. There is one thing I would love to just kind of finish up with. I know we're kind of going over time. I'll start with Randy real quick. I know you have to hop off shortly, but the last thing I want to end on and kind of ask you guys about is what do you know now in your role that you wish you knew when you were a community advocate? And we've touched on it a little bit, but I just wanted to know if there's one sentence or one thing that you're like, I wish I knew this as an advocate. Now I know as an elected official.
The one thing that I wish I would have known as an advocate that I now know as an elected official is just how spread thin elected officials are. They need to know a lot about a lot of different issues. So it is super valuable, the information that you are bringing into our office. And I'm super grateful for our constituents that will take the time and effort to engage. But it is extremely important, and I think we've kind of touched on that in this call enough to get it through, but just wanted to say again, come in, do your research, be clear and concise, know what your ask is. If you're coming in to build a relationship, that is completely fine, but just make sure that the elected official knows that that's your intention, and they can be prepared for that too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Vaughn?
Yeah, so I would say all the way up to the level of the president or our world leaders. The one thing I guess that I sort of maybe it opened my eyes to it becoming a member of council is that sometimes we hold these folks on a pedestal and we think that they're superhuman. And the fact of the matter is they aren't. When I was a child, you know, my doctor was on a pedestal. As a matter of fact, doctors stayed on their pedestal until I was about 20 years old. And we're all human. And so you have to, if you understand that, if you're not, because we go into these meetings nervous and we worry about, you know, the fact that we're dealing with this, oh, high and mighty, you know, like, what do? I bow? Do I call him your honor? Do I, you know, this person is a human and you need to appeal to that human aspect. And I think that you'll get further. And I think that's something that it took me being on the council seat and sitting right next to the mayor and realizing this is just another person sitting next to me, you know, but it's the mayor of my town. That's kind of cool, you know, but he's just a guy. And I feel like we could go a long way by understanding that. Ooh, the dogs had something to say too.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And I know Randy has to hop off. Just want to say thank you so much for being on. We so appreciate your time. You're the best.
Of course. Thank you.
Awesome. And I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy as well as we do that to also give him the opportunity. What do you know now as an elected official that you wish you knew as a community advocate?
I think one of the ones that hasn't been said yet is that running for office is not the only thing to affect change. I thought very much like this was my way to affect change. I know we've kind of touched on it, but I think of all of our responsibilities as active citizens. Like active citizenship matters. Come to the meetings. You don't have to be an elected official to affect change, but participate in government. Know who your candidates are, meet them individually. You can make a difference without being on the ballot.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I just wanted to say thank you to all of the elected officials and folks that joined this morning. We so appreciate your time and expertise, and I'm so glad to hear from each and every one of you about the wonderful things you're doing for your communities. So thank you so much again, Jeremy Griffin, Vaughn Ripley, Randy Kleitz. Thanks, Bob Graham, as the moderator, and thank you to the New York State Bleeding Disorder Coalition for pulling this together. So just want to say thank you to everyone. Vote Vaughn, vote for Jeremy, vote Randy Kleitz for Ohio on Facebook, and yeah, and thank you so much. You'll definitely be seeing more of this, and we'll be snagging some of their answers for future use. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great weekend, and
Thanks,
much appreciated.
That was awesome. Thank you.